Hello and welcome to Expected Value, the podcast that goes inside the sports analytics world. I'm Paul Carr from True Media. This is episode 75 of the show. I'm calling this the Barry Zito episode for the 2002 Cy Young winner who wore number 75 with the A's and the Giants. He is not, I don't think, the most accomplished athlete to wear 75. That probably goes to maybe Mean Joe Green or Deacon Jones. But Barry Zito is more relevant to this episode. He was known for his big sweeping curveball, which is something that our guest today would love to analyze. We're talking with Lance Brozdowski, who is a player development analyst for Marquee Sports Network, which is the Cubs regional channel. He also has his own Substack page and YouTube channel where he goes even deeper with his analysis and uses True Media's baseball site in the process with heat maps, movement plots to underscore his various points. Lance is really good at taking traditional baseball analysis and adding a deeper perspective by diving into the numbers and the techniques related to pitch movement, release points, swing shapes, things like that. He has a background in numbers and a background in journalism, so he's a great guest to speak about the convergence of the two here. In this episode, we'll talk with Lance about his path from studying accounting to talking baseball on TV, advice for someone trying to break into baseball analysis, communicating complex ideas in easily digestible ways, how he goes about pitcher analysis from scratch, his initial takeaways from MLB's newly released bat tracking data, what kind of data he wishes were more available, and his favorite pitch from a current pitcher. Then producer Brian Duffley will join me to react and wrap things up. Without further ado, here's the Expected Value conversation with Marquee Sports Network's Lance Brozdowski. We're joined now on Expected Value by Lance Brozdowski, Player Development Analyst from Marquee Sports Network. That's the Cubs regional network. Lance, welcome to the show. Let's start with your path, and then we'll get into more of what you're doing right now. You went to UMass Amherst, which I've learned how to pronounce correctly from my time in New England. What did you study there, and what were you thinking at the time initially?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Always good to connect. Yeah, I studied accounting. Which doesn't really make any sense, but
of course you did.
Of course I did. Yeah. It was an interesting path. I think I just enjoyed business a lot, and I'd always been in the baseball space. Just didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do, So I thought accounting was pretty stable, but I was in the sport department a lot, and honestly, like the only mentor I still have from the college is one of their graduate sport professors who's still like a really good friend and someone who's kind of guided me into the sport field and through the sport field, who did like a lot of sport media classes and such. So shout out to Will Norton there, who's still there. But yeah, I was an accountant and I worked for PwC, one of the big four accounting firms in Boston for a couple of years, and knew immediately I needed to get out of there. So I kind of pivoted to Northwestern grad school, sports journalism. Have always been interested in more the communication, I would say, of things as opposed to from an operations standpoint inside an organization. This is probably one of the reasons why I'm still on the media side. So I feel like I'm building a niche out.
Okay, so you went to Medill, Northwestern for grad school, and what specifically were you studying there? And what were you thinking? Like, what were you thinking? Here's what I'm going to do and hoping to do with that master's degree.
Yeah, so I studied sports journalism there in their graduate program, sports journalism specialization with a journalism master's. I think at the time when I went in, I wanted to be a beat writer, actually. I was a little bit torn up on what to do in the field. I just, I think to some extent the graduate program, I wouldn't say it was like a little traditional, but it's traditional journalism practice, like you learn.
Sure.
I didn't have a journalism background, so like you learn very fundamental reporting and et cetera, all that stuff. That's pretty essential, I think, to what I do today. It's just maybe not as direct, but as a byproduct of that, I think I wanted to just try to emulate Ken Rosenthal and be that kind of newsbreakery person. Then I realized like talking to agents wasn't the most fun thing in the world. No offense to agents out there, but it just didn't really move me to be like, hey, I just really want you to tell me where you think this guy's going to sign, so I have like info that I can then trade with someone else. I was more like I just kind of buckled up, and I found that I just really enjoy talking to coaches a lot more. And I still do. Like I'd honestly prefer to talk to coaches. No offense to players, but over players most of the time. I feel like I learn more. I can pick their brain more. They have maybe more developed thoughts. They're the communicator. They're bridging between R&D and on field. So I just think that's essential to understanding and where the game's going. And I think that's always been what I've tried to keep the pulse on, is like how are things changing? What are teams doing differently from one another, and where are things progressing? So yeah, I wasn't maybe entirely sure how I was gonna impact what I was doing now at Medill, but I knew it's the field generally where I wanted to be, and it just kind of helped me polish off and define and develop some skills.
So during your years in college and grad school, you're still doing baseball related things. What are you doing in that sense to keep those baseball skills sharp, if you will?
Well, it was cool that we could do a lot of the reporting I did for grad school was baseball related, which is a part of the reason why I enjoy that program so much. So like my like capstone style project at the end of the curriculum was a few reported baseball pieces. I did one on the Astros and a couple other, just like three separate pieces that were more developed and reported out on, again, where the game
Like a
was going.
traditional
Yeah,
magazine or newspaper style
exactly,
piece,
exactly.
feature piece.
But all baseball related. So I tried to get it in wherever I could, and I think they encouraged that too, which was huge. Like some people wanted to do basketball, wanted to do play-by-play and stuff. So like a lot of their projects would tie back to basketball, and the day-to-day stuff was
Mhm.
loose enough such that you could make it work. So I did a lot of coverage in minor leagues. At the time, the Midwest League was still low A. So King County Cougars in Chicago, outside of the Chicago area, were still a team that was affiliated Major League side. I used to drive out to Fort Wayne a lot, South Bend, Indiana. So I had enough reporting around there to like poke around and meet players and pretend they were major league level, and had access to minor league data, advanced data. So it was able to kind of tie the data angle into everything and kind of thread and make my angle, so to speak. But the whole time I knew I wanted to do major league stuff. I've always enjoyed the player
Right.
development side. Just I've found the edge that I've built has been more on the minor league side, just because there's not a lot of people that's familiar with the data or that even have access to the data. Advanced stuff, talking like pitch shapes, exit velocities, and such. It's become a little more
Hmm.
ubiquitous now, which I think is really good for the game in
Yeah.
terms of growth and understanding. But but yeah, no, I was able to kind of blend things together at Middle. That really helped me figure out what my voice was.
Yeah. Where along this path did, I guess, your voice, your interest in the more advanced data come in, or how did that develop?
Yeah, I think I'd always had that. It's probably tying back to the accounting days where like I'm very comfortable in Excel, and like I prefer, it's funny, like I feel like even you guys in True Media and stuff sometimes package things in a certain way, and I'm always like, can I just get like a straight CSV export and let me play around with it? It's like I'm probably one of the few
Stop
people.
making it look pretty.
I
Just
know,
give me
I
the
know. It's
numbers.
like it's much easier. Just like click export and then I'll rip it however I want.
Right.
So it's funny that I mean I'm on air as media, and it's like one of those weird. Like I doubt there are many people who can like play around with data like that. But I'm sure there are, actually. I know there's a couple people in other sports that do a pretty good job, especially football
Oh
and
yeah.
basketball and such. But it's ironic that baseball, I feel like to some extent, doesn't have as many of those differentiated voices on the
Mm.
data side. I would say done a really good
Mhm.
job with the Statcast broadcast and ESPN, for example, Mike Petriello, Eduardo Perez, and others.
Yep.
I think they're really well versed in it. But I was hoping it would boil down to the regional side more. Because it's such a
Right.
local
Right.
sport relative to everything else. But it hasn't yet. So I think that's maybe where I built out some of the niche.
Yep. We're getting there. We're getting there. Okay. So someone's trying to get into this. I'll just call it this world of baseball analysis, writing, coverage, whatever. If someone's looking to do that now, where are you pointing them? What's kind of the starter kit, if you will, to start analyzing it in different ways?
I'd say Savant is a huge resource. You guys have obviously been very kind to me at True Media. That's my preferred outlet, honestly, just because it's packaged beautifully.
Of course.
Come on, the heat maps there are the best. But yeah, I mean, I think the main thing I'd push you into two things. I'd push you into video, number one, and then I'd
Hmm.
just say create as much as you possibly can. And I'd say this goes for someone who's trying to do it on the media side and someone who's also trying to break into an organization. I've had some calls with like kids in the off season in undergrad trying to figure out what they want to do, and they're like, I want to break in with a team. And it's like, you got to make something, like you have to have some
Right.
portfolio of work, whether it's video or I even just blog. Like I've seen so many people get hired just from good blog posts. You can see on Twitter all the
Yeah.
time. There's people who have really insightful things, and in a year they're gone. Like I saw some
Yep.
kid, Dylan, I think Droomy is his name. I'm probably pronouncing his last name wrong, but he got scooped by the Brewers. He posted like some computer vision stuff, like tracking catcher gloves and trying to back into like command scores often. And I was like, yeah,
Hmm.
you're gone.
Nice.
Thanks for putting that out there, but
Yep.
we're not going to now have you in a year on the public side anymore. So
Fun
it's just
while
like
it lasted.
super obvious. So you have to create, like you just have to make stuff. And for me, like I use a lot of the outlets that I have, like YouTube and even Substack, as ways to create such that I can learn. Because a lot of the time I'll run into conversations with people who've seen work and who might disagree with something, or say, hey, look at this instead of that. And that's kind of how you develop your voice and understanding of things. So I would say create and video are the two things. Like it's funny, the Substack for me has grown pretty nicely, but I've been trying to figure out a way to like turn that into more of a video medium thing. I just think that's how a lot of
Hmm.
people are consuming information. And I still think the baseball space can really use, like, Foolish Bailey does a great job. John Boy does a great job with Jolly Olive and some of those guys on the creator side. But I still think there's like, I've always wanted Fangraphs to like start a video arm and just turn like all of their written content into video. Because I honestly think it would
Right.
pull more in terms of numbers, and you'd be able to part it out and get people a little more exposed to the information who are a little younger and trying to access the game. So I think that's where my brain's now, is like trying to figure out YouTube and some other channels to push things video wise, because I really think that's where the industry's going generally. Writing will always exist. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be the way to catch some upside and really grow into someone who's differentiating the space.
Yeah, I gotcha. So let's talk about what you do with Marquee. Again, the Cubs Regional Sports Network. You are a player development analyst for them. What does that mean? Because
Yeah,
there
yeah.
aren't a lot. I don't know if I know of anyone else with that title for an RSN.
Yeah, we made the title. It's a fun one. It's my role is interesting. So I do a lot of producing here, which is literally like today we literally have Joe Girardi in. He's been in for the whole week, and for our pregame shows here on the RSN, we have like more specified segments where Joe will literally come in like 30 minutes before he's supposed to be in, and I'll be already sitting there, and he'll come over and we'll chat for like 45 minutes about, last night was Jameson Tyone, like approach. What is he doing? What has he changed from April? Why is he getting hit? Should he do anything differently? And then we'll try to build like an angle that is trying to, something that we can communicate video wise on our pregame show that allows Joe to kind of flex his muscles a little from the analysis standpoint. So it's a blend of being able to access various data interfaces like Savant and show him things, help him out. He comes in with stuff a lot of the time, and then taking what we talked about and literally going into Premiere or Media Composer and making a video for him. That's like most of
Mm-hmm.
my job. I'd say like maybe 50% of my job. And then the other 50% of my job is on air. So I have a segment twice a week that's sponsored. That's really, again, it's a similar process to what I did with Joe. It's just with myself. Like I'm coming up with the angle, building the video for it, building the graphics for it, and then going delivering it on air in our pregame, usually between 4 to 8 minutes or so, discussion with our talent or someone else. It could be anything. Like we've done some high level stuff I've really enjoyed this year about the Red Sox backing off fastballs generally. Like we talked about that when the Cubs played the Red Sox, had Ryan Dempster in, chatted like a 8-10 minute discussion about whether he liked that, what I thought about it, whether it's something, like kind of, I enjoy getting in those situations where someone will disagree with me, like a Demp will be like, no, I actually think this is a terrible idea because of X. And it's like, okay, cool. Like I
Yeah.
respect that, but like data says this, like, why do you disagree? Like having those conversations on air, I really think is super valuable. It makes A, for good content, and B, it just makes people smarter overall about the game. So that's kind of my job, I would say. And then I do a lot of stuff on the minor league side too. We have shows, every other week we do like a 30-minute show. It's more developed with interviews. And then we have every second Friday we'll have a live show for about two and a half hours with Jim Callis from MLB Pipeline and Elise Menaker, who's one of our reporters here, where we'll just watch the 4 Cubs minor league teams at the same time and talk development
Hmm.
players, etc. So that's really fun. Rep number one from my standpoint, just to be able to sit on air for 2 hours
Yeah.
and ramble about player development. But it also results in some really good discussions, especially with Jim in there.
Yeah. What are a couple keys to getting? So obviously you're dealing with. Sometimes it's complex information. Sometimes it's unknown information. I think to a lot of people watching. How do you try to communicate those in clear, concise ways on TV?
I'd say a lot of the time it's disguising things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Turning them into something that is just a little bit more digestible, or a thing that I sometimes occasionally do. Like the other day, I threw up like an X-Woba, and like instead of describing X-Woba and nerding out, like have fun with it, Like I
Right.
try to like we were looking at the differential between X-Woba and Woba, right? Just guys who are a bit unlucky, but instead of looking at pure like BABIP, we want to do something a little more advanced from like a total contribution to run production, for example. So like
Yeah.
the board went up, and like you have fun with it. Like you say, like I know those numbers are terrifying. Don't look at them. It doesn't matter. What we're looking at is how much you're contributing to run scoring. We're looking at the luckiest hitters and unluckiest hitters. The difference here means you're super unlucky. Like stuff like that. Like not literally saying the definition of xWOBA is this. The average xWOBA is 350 or whatever it is. Like staying away from very deliberate ways of pointing out the data, I think has started to at least make things a little more digestible. And a lot of the times, like talking to people like Girardi and Cliff Floyd, Ryan Dempster, et cetera, the guys we have in, they already have really developed opinions. And I won't say they're stubborn, but they're opinionated. And that's why we bring them in, right? We
Yeah.
want people who are opinionated. That works on television. So those conversations are often sometimes difficult, right? Like the one that we talked about with Dempster about fastball usage and stuff. Like he just thought that over time it would expose breakers more, such that when you see teams in the postseason and late in season, they wouldn't be as effective. Then you also have some concerns on the
Right.
health side, but like stuff like that is sometimes hard to back up with the data. Like I can't go to
Mhm.
Savant quickly and understand decay of a
Right.
pitch type when it's thrown
Right.
8 times in a row. Like I like thinking about that stuff, but I don't have a hard number to back it up. So a lot of the time, what we'll do is like I like accepting you have to be open to accepting what they say, regardless of whether you think they're
Right.
wrong. Like we had a segment with Cliff Floyd the other day, and it was looking at the new StatCast stuff, looking at bat speed and sweet spot, like trying to come up with some proxy for bat to ball, and then coming up with some proxy for how hard you hit the ball. And Cliff was like, I want the guy who squares with the ball. It's like I think that a lot of bat speed is like not too trainable, and it's like, oh, that's interesting because I completely disagree with that. So I actually think that
Mhm.
like we know a lot about force production and ground force reaction, and we could, not we, not saying me, but I'm saying like what I've learned
Right. The
from
royal we.
yeah, the Royal We, like talking to Driveline, etc. Like I understand that like a lot of their process is building up bat speed. So like stuff like that is fun. Like where points where I can interject and at least provide a different perspective. And I'm not doing it in like accusatory way. I'm more so doing
Right.
it in a way
Yeah,
that
that's important.
gets Cliff to maybe think differently or have him expand more on why he thinks that's not true. You know? And I think
Yeah.
that's where you really get into like making our analysts good. Like I want to look good on air too. Like I have my own brand I'm trying to grow, but at the same time, like
Of
I'm
course.
also there to make our talent look good. Like I want to make Cliff look
Right.
good. So if Cliff says that and then I tell him that I think that's wrong, like I want him to then go deeper and convince me I'm wrong. And like there's times where they've done that, or they stump me on air, or they'll pull something up that's a little more anecdotal. That's like, yeah, I mean, you might be right. Like admitting that you don't know everything is, I think, a really important trait in this field.
Yeah. I think from my experience, you get those two different perspectives. The key is trying to sharpen the other, So
Yeah,
asking why, not in a what's wrong with you way, but in a explain this to me, I don't get it, or help me understand this better sort of way. That's what, and when you get the right people, like you're saying, you get a Girardi who's, pretty good at explaining things, or Cliff Floyd who's passionate about stuff. That's when you get the good TV to me, because I'm learning
absolutely,
something as a fan, and even you guys are learning something in the studio too.
absolutely, 100% agree.
So you mentioned the new bat tracking stuff with MLB. This came out a few weeks ago. Early takeaways for you from that? I mean, obviously, we have a relatively small sample size, and we're just getting access to it, so I'm not expecting some grand revelation, but just kind of curious your initial impressions of what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that I've glommed onto is more adjustments based on count. Is like the two strike adjusters and figuring out if guys
Mhm.
actually have A, B, C swings. And if they say they have ABC swings, is it backed up in the data? Like a lot of the time, I think we use data just to back up what we've thought. Like try to, do guys actually adjust with two strikes? And it's like, yeah, most guys. I think it's the average hitter drops like 1 to 1.5 miles per hour bat speed in two strike situations. So it's like, okay, cool. Like we know
Mhm.
that, and we're praising a guy perhaps that is just adjusting like the league average. So it's like, okay, maybe everyone has a two-strike approach. And then are there guys that are more aggressive? Are there guys that toggle down even more than that? Why are they doing that? Is that actually productive? Like I think that's my main thing that I've digested and I think is really actionable. I will say I've gotten caught up a little bit in some of the swing length stuff, just because it seems like
Right.
contact points nestled within that. And that is, I think, is skewing to some extent what we're seeing in terms of longer swings and shorter swings. So maybe at some point we figure out contact point, and get that as a specific variable, and then we could tie that all in and start to understand, like, with contact point consistent, who has the longest and shortest swing, etc. So I'm curious to see how this all develops. Like I would say I'm not a preeminent researcher. Like I'm not the person who's ingesting this data and coming up with new information, like that
Right.
Seeger metric from Robert Orr and stuff, like on Twitter, who works for Baseball Prospectus, I believe. Like that's cool. Like I love stuff like that. I love learning about that stuff. But I'm not the person who's going to go build the next Seeger. I'm more like, let me think about things. Let me talk to people, coaches, etc.,
Yeah.
and then let me develop my own opinion. So I'm more curious to see as we get new information. I believe there's going to be another rollout at some point this year that's going to bring in some attack angle stuff, which I'm pretty excited about. That stuff's cool, and I'm excited to see like what other people have insight wise off that, and also like what my impressions are and how I could use that in my own analysis. So I enjoy it.
Yep.
I think it's more the beginning of better understanding of how hitters create damage is probably the most succinct way to
Yep.
put it. And I think that's super valuable to the sport as a whole, especially as offense is something the league really wants to push.
Some of the numbers were very intuitive. Giancarlo Stanton swings hard. I think we all could have told you that.
Yep.
Anything surprise you? Like you see it and you're like, oh, whether it's I didn't think of that or I thought it was something different. What jumped out at you from that angle?
I would say some of the guys who create top end bat speed with short swing lengths, which again, I don't
Hmm.
necessarily know if the contact point stuff there would muddy some of this. or if these guys just have shallower or that'd be deeper contact points, therefore their swings are
Right.
shorter. Like that could be a byproduct again of the pitch type they're seeing and swinging at more and making contact with. There's a lot of noise in there, but I think like a Wyatt Langford came up there, Brian Hayes, some of these guys that are young that are maybe still developing as hitters that I've been skeptical of at times, maybe not so much Wyatt Langford, but like Brian Hayes has gone through ups and downs in his career and trying to figure out who he is as a hitter. He's still relatively young. He's always been a good glove. So I've always wondered, well, he's just going to get a lot of time to figure things out. But now you have like a hard data point that's like, no, he's got really good raw traits from like a short swing, ton of bat speed point. So I like stuff like that. Like those, that leaderboard, if I'm remembering, it's Wyatt Langford. I think of Brian Hayes is in. There's probably a couple other guys I'm missing as well. That board of like ton of bat speed, short swing length jumped out to me. Corey Seager's in there too. So it's maybe good validation that it matters. I like that and thinking of that from a, I would say that surprised me a bit just to see guys up there, because I think a lot of times you think certain guys have short swings, but it's actually like an average swing length. So it was cool to see some of the guys that jumped out.
Let's switch to the pitching side. You talk a lot about whether it's pitch selection, arm slots, things like that affect the pitcher and how effective he is. Let's say you're starting from scratch. You kind of just walk me through how you start to analyze. I'll be a homer. If it's someone like Cole Reagans, and you say, all right, what has he done to turn his season and career around the last year or two, or this year, the things that he's changing, something like that? How do you just kind of start? Where do you start when you want to analyze what a pitcher is doing or not doing?
That's a great question. I was actually doing this with Joe the other day because I think he asked how I like if I was looking at a picture blank slate, what would I do? And I was literally like, I'll just walk you through it, So again, like I swear I'm not plugging you guys here, but I jumped to True Media. I generally am looking first at usage, I would say. So I'll go, like Cole Reagans, I'm doing it right now, literally. Cole Reagans, he's a lefty, so a little easier. I'm just going to probably focus on righty attack because he's going to be stacked righties against him. I'll look at usage as a whole. So he's like 40% four seam, a lot of changeup, curveball, cutter. I'll look at like less than 2 strikes, like what is he doing when he's ahead? Interesting, fastball usage actually drops less than 2 strikes, ever so slightly. And then as he gets into 2 strike counts, it goes up. So like, okay, that's a little like, I saw this with Paul Skeens too, like approach standpoint, what is he doing? From there, I'll probably toggle into shapes as a whole. So like understand like what exactly is he doing from like a shape perspective? Is he throwing hard? Yeah, he throws 97. Like what's the shape? He's got a pretty good amount of vert. His release slot's high. Okay, off that, he's got like bullet slider, big curve. Seems like he has a changeup off that. Occasionally throws a cutter. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Like shape-wise understanding. I'll sometimes hop to a stuff model just to see. It's funny when stuff models first became pretty popular. I would say I used those first just to get a baseline, and now I'm using them. I think I've just internalized shape and velo so much that like I'll come up with what I think it is in my head, and then after I'll look at stuff and be like, is this validated? And a lot of the times, like you'd see small differences. Like I think that kid who came up for the Padres the other day, Adam. Oh, I don't know how to say his last name. Mazar. Kind of a command style righty. Throws hard, not the best on shape side, but I thought because he threw 95, stuff models would like that. Even if he cut the pitch a little, I think it was only like 16 vertical from a high release, so like a little bit below average in terms of carry for him. But I think Eno's stuff model on Fangraphs had it at like a 74 four seam, which is like a minus four seam, and I was like, ooh, disagree. Right. Like that's 95. Like for me, it's hard to find a pitch at 95, averaging sitting 95, which he sat in AAA too. It wasn't like a debut boost for him. So I was like, I just disagree. I would rather have that. I'd take that pitch maybe more like slightly below average, like a 95, 90, 95, and then plays up because of execution and stuff. So I would say like that's how I've developed using stuff models. But in terms of shapes, like after understanding shapes, I'll probably jump to like heat maps more so. I like looking like frequency, like where are you throwing the pitch? I'll split that sometimes by count too to see if there's a differentiator there. You look at a guy like Ranger Suarez is interesting. A lot of sinkers to righties from a lefty slot. He toggles between 2 locations based on count, like early count he's away, late count he's in. So like picking up stuff like that I think is really important. And you can see this when you watch too. I just find it easier to like digest it with the data really quick and then use all that information to then watch if I'm watching a player, I'll do this a lot of the time if I'm just like putting on a game late and I don't necessarily know the pitcher off the top of my head. I did with like Joey Estes the other day, or literally yesterday. It was A's Mariners, and I heard about Joey Estes, but I had no idea like what he threw. I just never looked at him. So I quickly like did exactly what I'm doing here as I talk through it and like understood what he did and then watched. And I was like, oh, what is different? Or, adding that layer in at the end of the video side is really important. So I'd say that's my process. Like look at usage, split it up, go to shapes, then look at locations and then watch. Maybe there's a better way to do it, but that's kind of where I've landed now. And it's definitely developed over time. I'm trying to watch more. And I think my favorite thing was this offseason, I got a chance. not all season, but spring training, to after like thinking I made a lot of progress and understanding a lot of the information, to just like I don't want to say scout, but sit behind home and watch a bunch of games. And I watched like a bunch of games at Sloan Park, like saw like Justin Steele, JP Sears, and like you see him in the numbers
Mm-hmm.
so long, and you see him on video, but it's different when you're watching the guy from behind home and you see that angle, you know. So it's like actually then threading things back into life, so to speak, is I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
really important,
Connecting everything together.
and it helped. I think just made me realize that I'm not 100% sure on anything I'm looking at. It's just maybe
Yeah.
like a weird way to think about all this, but it's just the honest truth. Like I don't know why Justin Steele's good. I think it's angle. Like nothing really grades out too well there. I've had other coaches tell me it's like, oh, it's spin rate and stuff, and it's like, wow, that's really like basic 2015 Statcast rollout reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's one of those things. It's just good, I think, sometimes to like look at results too and see if you're just wrong about something and why you might be wrong.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah, it would be. I wish we had a lot of these numbers. Like Greg Maddux is the easy example. Like when he's pitching, because everyone kind of says we don't know how he's getting everybody out, but he is.
yep.
And it'd be great if we had the numbers to see whatever it might be, or yeah,
I'd love to
things
do
along
it.
those
Yeah,
lines would be fun.
I remember listening to Rates and Barrels of Saris, and he was talking about like what Mariano Rivera's cutter shape would have been, and it's like that's a great question because that thing ate up hitters. It's not as hard as like Emmanuel Clasé's. Like what exactly would the shape have been there, and like would it have
Right.
been as much of an outlier in the current data set and stuff? So I think about that stuff a lot. I agree.
Quick story: Mariano Rivera is kind of the, I don't know, not godfather of true media, but when this is
Oh,
before I was even here, before we got started, his heat map was like the example to sell people
oh, love it.
because obviously it's just in on the hands of every lefty,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and especially I think in an 0-2 count, like it's just bright red right there. So that was like the easy, digestible. Here's what you can do with graphics thing in the beginning, just based on pitch locations, not the shape, but locations because it's right there. So he's a favorite around here. I'll tell you.
Yeah, good stuff. That's a cool story.
Okay, I want to know how you watch a game, and we could attack this a couple different ways. But if you're just, let's say you're sitting on a couch at home, you're not working this game necessarily, kind of like you said a minute ago. It's late now. You're flipping on whatever West Coast game it is. What's your brain thinking as you're going? I'm always interested in how analysts watch games because it's different than your average fan or someone like me.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think I do watch occasionally with a second screen. I would say if you're isolating me from work, like at work we watch Cub games, but like most of the time there's other
Right.
games going on, and most of the time I have another game up that I'm watching simultaneously, especially if the Cubs are losing, just to kind of check out. You know what I mean? I'm like, all right, let's watch Logan Gilbert pitch or something. Um, in those situations, I say I'm more active on second screen. I'll
Mm-hmm.
pull up like live data feeds and stuff and like see shape. Is there velo difference? Like, how's he attacking hitters in this game that's different? Just simple stuff in Savant or True Media or whatever. But if you catch me just like home, and I've tried to do this more when I'm not actually like analyzing a game and I'm just watching. Like, again, we get
Right.
out relatively late here, but most of the time when I get home, there's a West Coast game going on. And although I'm probably catching relievers, what I'll often do is I'll probably just jump back to the beginning of the game and watch the starter of the game because I just enjoy watching starters more. The thing that I think I watch most closely is how hitters are turned over from a starter. So, like the Otani Skeens matchup, again, I'm really heavy on
Mm-hmm.
yesterday, but it's because it's top of mind.
Yeah, it's a
Otani
good one.
Skeens is a good one, right? It's like he throws, like, what was it, 4 fastballs in the first AB? And then he gets to the second AB and he
Right.
throws 3 more. Like, stuff like that I like thinking about broadly as, like, how pitches decay, how hitters get familiar with pitches, why pitchers would throw in a certain location, what they're seeing. So I'll play a little, like, amateur, advanced scout
Yeah,
on
amateur
stuff.
pitch call or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
exactly. And like try to see what the guy's doing from a sequencing perspective. More so than purely is he hitting those locations and targets, etc. Maybe some of that stuff you could pick up just subconsciously if you watch 5 innings of a guy. You could probably roughly gauge if his command was on or off relative to his season average and stuff. But I'd say like if you no data, no second screen for me, it's more just like trying to think more broad, not even broad. I'd actually say it's more specific in like why throw this there. Think about prior
Yeah.
pitches and the line, so to speak, the guy might have set up to a given hitter. Like, why is he moving off that? How did that miss affect prior pitch? Like, what is he going to do now? I watch more so that stuff, I would say, if in a casual viewing. It's hard to turn that off sometimes, I would say.
Right.
I think that I do turn it off sometimes with college, just it seems like the approach is a little more simple there and stuff. Like watching some of the College World Series,
Right.
it's like you're not watching like a Trey Savage or something like that. You're watching just more of a regular starter. Like some of the guys there just throw a ton of fastballs, and it's like, okay, like I could really turn my brain off here because he's throwing 70-75% fastball, and you know what I mean. It's every count. It's pretty
Just
common.
making
So
it hit it. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that is just more probably raw enjoyment of the game.
Yeah. What is something you wish you could measure? Meaning, if I come to you from the Statcast future and say, what thing do you want to know about a pitch or baseball in general? What's one thing you'd like to have measurable that we don't have right now?
There's probably a better answer than this, but I wish we had more biomechanics stuff on. I guess on the hitter side, that might get pretty complex, but I think from the pitcher side, it would help a lot in some of my analysis too. Of like, I think a lot of the time what we end up with on the public side is more. I don't know if this is the correct term, but I've used it a bit. Is like you get an output variable. Like we're looking at release, we're looking at shape, we're looking at velocity.
Yeah.
Which are all a byproduct of like very simple physics of ground reaction force and how that's affecting the pitcher and how he's channeling energy and sequencing, et cetera.
You're getting in the research world, we say we're telling you the what first.
Yeah.
We're not telling you the why yet.
Exactly.
Let's start with the what, and ideally you can get to the why, but sometimes we don't have the right tools to measure that.
And I think a lot of the biomech stuff would unearth a lot of the why. Like again, I see like release heights drop, this and that, fatigue throughout the year. It's like I see the release going down, like 100 green this year since a guy that's ticking down a little bit, and it's like, okay, is that like, why is that happening? Like, I don't think he's just, everything is the same and his arm's coming down. Like, it's probably lower body based. Right. Like, is it stride direction? Is there just something happening in the lower body that's different? Why is the velo down? Like that stuff I would like better information on of just like, did something change? Looking at start to start, coming up with like what you call almost like a fingerprint of a pitcher and how he moves. How does that deviate start to start? You go look at, I remember there's a start early in the season, that Glasnow game in Minnesota where he K'd like 14 through 7. That was a weird start because to me, the thing that jumped out was that he was cutting everything a ton. And again, I'm looking at, there was no change in release, but all the shapes moved. Like everything was more glove side for him and everything was more outer third, especially to righties. And I was like, I don't really think that was intentional. I don't think they went into that game like, let's keep everything away from them, especially based on looking at like Will Smith's targets in that game. I just more looked at it and was like, he's just cutting the pitch. And I just wanted to know why.
Just coming out.
Like, was there something different about how he was moving his lower half? And like maybe Pryor and whoever else is in there was just like, it looks pretty good to us. Just keep doing it, man. And then immediately that start just reverted back, So like those odd individual instances where things are off, but they work really well. I really like. I wish we had more understanding of why they're happening, as he said.
Yeah. And I think we work on the team side and most of them have some kind of biomech data and it's obviously not public, but I think even they are trying to figure out what you're saying. We have all these data points. How do we tie all these together and what impacts what and what really matters and all that stuff? I would hope more of that comes out in the next few years from a public standpoint.
I hope so.
That'll be interesting to watch. A couple kind of fun questions here as we get near the end. You're on the Cubs side. Give me a Cubs prospect, maybe a little more under the radar that you are excited about coming down the pipe.
Yeah, there's a couple. I would say, I lean towards the pitching side a lot. There's a kid that's a super deep cut. I think he went to Maryland. His name's Nick Dean. He's a guy who's popped. I always love these guys that, like, when I put together prospect rankings and such, you have like 40 to 50 names. And inevitably, you're just going to miss someone, Like, I just don't know. Like, Dean's a guy who has, like, good extension, above average extension. He gets his release height down a bit, and he carries the ball well. And I think, like, something as basic as that in a pitcher who could, like, kind of zone the ball for A ball. He just got called up the high A South Bend, but when he was at Myrtle, like, he was pitching pretty well, and like that, I just had no idea who he was, prior, which it's maybe a deficit of me not need to go deeper on the Cubs prospects and stuff, but I just didn't know who he was, and I got a data export of like minor league data and looked through it, and he jumped. He was just like, oh, okay, like this is exactly what I'd want in an A ball pitcher, Like I don't know how he's going to develop. We'll see how the slider goes. We'll see if he develops anything else, but some semblance of feel. Like not outlier release traits or anything. It's just, it was a good fastball. Thought there was probably more room for velo. And like if he develops velo over time, even if that vertical break comes down, like the extension in the release, I think could carry him a bit. So he's a guy that's like super deep cut. I wouldn't say he's like the pop-up arm of the year for the org, but he's much more on my radar than he was prior, primarily because he was not on my radar at all.
Right. No, that's the advantage of the data is you can look at all the guys and see who's a little different and whatnot, and then figure out if that's how transferable that is or whatever it might be. And then we talk about this internally a lot. If you're starting an MLB franchise, we're ignoring contracts. Who's your first player selecting? So we're assuming you have this guy for like the next 5 years. We're not talking like just today. We'll say next 5 years. Who's the first guy you draft?
Yeah, I think the answer is Bobby Witt right now.
That's right, it is.
Yeah, I don't know. Is there another? I'm trying to
My
think.
guy.
Bobby's a good one.
Gun-
Gunner comes up,
Gunnar
right?
Henderson.
Yeah, Gunner's pretty
Yeah,
good.
Gunnar might be in the picture.
Gunner's another one too. I remember. I'm trying to think what year this was. There was a year where he completely changed his discipline in the minors. He went from being like a guy who was chasing too much and not making enough contact to like. I remember getting an early exported data in what was that? Probably 2022, maybe it was 21. Mixing the years here, but the year that he popped in the minors, like that was one of the more wild year-over-year changes I saw in like a player from the minor league data side. And I remember looking at that data and asking my source, and I was like, dude, who is that? Like that guy's got like 98th percentile, 90th EV, and his chase rate came down like 20 percentage points year over year. I was like, I don't know who that is, but like, my God, that is an incredible change. So whatever I've been meaning to talk to him. I've never been able to chat, but I want to ask him like what on earth clicked in that offseason, because that's how you make a prospect.
Guy on our staff named Tim Gibbons.
I know
He was on the
Tim,
pod
yeah.
a few episodes ago. He was the AAA Orioles hitting instructor around that time. So
I think
he might be taking
texted
credit
Jim
for it
about
as we
this.
speak.
I think I texted Jim about this,
Well,
actually.
and one of Tim's thing is like, don't swing at that stuff.
Yeah.
Don't swing it. So that sounds like it was exactly, I'm not saying like he takes sole credit, because I think it came from the top down, the Orioles, and Tim was one of those who implemented it. So yeah, I'm going to tell him that, and then I'm not going to do the end of it forever. So
I think I texted him. I'm sure if I went back into my archives, I could have sworn he was probably one of the first people I texted. I think I met him that year or something. Nice. I don't want to say that. Maybe he was in the AFL the following year. I don't remember particularly, but I'm pretty sure I was like, how did Gunnar Anderson cut his chase rate? And he was like,
Tim will tell you about his team's AFL not chasing.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Good. All right. A few things, playing favorites to finish it up. Our segment, we just ripped through a number of your favorites. Your favorite number and why?
Number 8. It was my dad's number growing up. That's purely the reason why I kind of carried over into my very amateur, terrible playing career.
Like it. Can't argue with that. Your favorite athlete as a kid?
Was Albert Pujols. Big Cardinal fan growing up, which is ironic because I work for the Cubs now, but you lose the fandom really quickly when you get in the industry. So
yeah, that'll be our little secret. We won't tell anyone, Cubs listeners or anything. Your favorite pitch from a current pitcher?
I'll go minor league. Give me the Hurston Waldrop split. That pitch is wacky,
wow.
Really fun. I would go Bryce Miller split, but Waldrop feels like the more woke answer here in terms of being a little more deep cut. So.
Briefly, at least, what does it do? I mean, I know what a splitter does, but I'm not familiar with his arsenal yet.
He kind of cuts his a little. So there's a really good video by Kylie McDaniel, ESPN, who had like slow-mo of it. He like supinates so much at release that he splits the ball, and when it comes out, it's just like, it's super gyro. It's like super gyro split. And as a result of that, I think gyro, low spin rate, you get a lot of variance in the shape. But it's just a really, really devastating pitch. I think it's like a 70 splitter. It's a really good offering.
It's got a little knuckle in it.
It does, yeah. Knuckle split, I think is what Kylie calls it, yeah.
Interesting. All right. Try to get you in trouble here. Your favorite Chicago pizza place?
I think my favorite is Pequod's. But I got to say, I'm not the biggest fan of Chicago pizza. I mean, I grew up on the East Coast. Like, New Haven, Connecticut has better pizza than Chicago, and New York has better pizza than Chicago. So I'll die on that hill. East Coast pizza is better.
We're definitely good.
I know.
Yeah, it's a different animal. And finally, you have a favorite "How did I get here" moment? Your career's brought you to where you are, and just like, hey, this is pretty cool that I get to do this, or this has happened to me.
Definitely, last year I got a chance to do sideline, which is basically being a reporter. Like you see them all the time when you watch regional games and stuff. But I got a chance to do it with kind of my more analytic angle, and I remember walking up. Like you do a hit, and like this particular hit was a center field camera on you. So you walk up the steps of Wrigley Field, third base side, and you like walk up, and like you're probably 2 minutes before first pitch, and it's like a Friday at a 1:20. So it's like it's a buzzing. It was midsummer, like those games are packed at that time of the year, and that was cool. Yep. Like that was a little bit. I don't want to say overwhelming. It probably was a little overwhelming for me, but just one of those like wow moments. Like this is wild. I can't believe I'm doing this. So that'll always stick in my head.
Yeah, great. It's great. Love it. Good story to end with. All right, Lance Brozdowski, Player Development Analyst for Marquee Sports Network. Thanks for joining us here on Expected Value.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Back in the True Media studios, I'm Paul Carr. Thank you to Lance Brozdowski for joining us on this show. You can see him on Cubs broadcasts on Marquee Sports Network. You can follow him on Twitter at Lance Broz, LanceBroz. And subscribe to his Substack and YouTube channels. One thing I like about his Substack, there's daily emails that typically analyze a few pitchers, what they may be doing well or struggling with or doing differently. I think it's good stuff for any serious baseball fan, and you can find links to all those things in our show notes. I'm joined now by producer Brian Duffley, who's also a serious baseball fan. He formerly worked for the Tigers and White Sox before joining True Media earlier this year. Brian, I know you enjoyed listening to Lance get in the analysis weeds, and you have a player development background, but from the team side. So I'm curious what you took away from the conversation with Lance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing me on. But I think what was most intriguing about Lance relative to the way he looks at player development was just some of the things that he has access to. Like, obviously, the general fan doesn't have true media usage, so they're not going to our site initially to look through different ways of breaking down players. But at the same time, Baseball Savants, just the implementation of StatCast has been a huge addition for everybody who's more intrigued by things like pitch movements, exit velos, trying to understand a little bit more about, the whole expected outcomes kind of situation and, future projection. So listening to him talk about some of the things he looks at, it really resonated as far as some of the things that I saw in my experience with teams, such as biomechanics was a big one he talked about,
Yeah.
wishing that he had a little bit more access to. And it seems like something that teams would be utilizing often, but in reality, it's a little bit hard to implement as
Mm-hmm.
far as just the timing of everything. Like early in spring training, you'll see a lot of guys get on the force plates, use the K vests, and
Mm-hmm.
start building out like 3D swing models of kind of just their entire mechanics, but also with pitchers too. They'll do kind of like pitching lab ordeals that you see in, drive line and all these other places. But during
Right.
the minor league season, it's practically impossible to get guys to just take the time to do that. I mean, especially with pitchers, not every single affiliate's going to have some sort of advanced pitching lab. But then with hitters too, getting guys onto force plates just through the entire grind of the season is sometimes a lot to ask just
Mm-hmm.
because you're already doing regular BP, you're doing all of your pregame routines, you have to weight lift, you have to go see the trainers, and you end up spending most of your day doing all these various things that then to have to guys come in and be like, hey, I know we're in July, but I need you to hop on the force plates, put on the K vest, and we're going to see what your swing looks like in the middle of the season.
Mm. Yeah.
It's good data to have, but it's not something that teams are going to regularly implement, maybe every few months to see a beginning of season, middle of season, end of season kind of
Yeah.
ordeal.
No, that's a good point. I mean, there's a practical side to this of getting the data. Obviously, like every minor league park is not rigged with StatCast cameras to get skeletal pose information that they have at the MLB level. So yeah, I mean, the MLB teams have that data. I think there's my impression is they're still figuring out what to do with it. You can do
Mm-hmm.
some things, whether it's something changed and now your arm angle is different or whatever. Yeah, teams are still they've just had it for a couple years or so they're still figuring out what to do with it. I think it'd be pretty interesting to see, but they're all trying. They all have biomechanics people that we talk to about accessing the data and figuring out what to do with it, which is pretty
Yeah.
interesting. But you make a good point. Like you get past the MLB level, and it's a different challenge just to get the data itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And just obviously, you need to have players and coaches be willing and open to do these things where the front office can always be saying, hey, we need data on player X because we want to see their changes from 3 months ago when we got them in spring.
Mm-hmm.
But then player X is plenty busy with a bunch of other things. The hitting coach may not be all that invested in it. And so trying to like find time to do these things can be a little bit difficult. And then it just
Yeah,
ends up getting put off sometimes where next thing you know, you're 2, 3 series later and it's like, oh yeah, we were supposed to do that.
and it makes me wonder. So like I've been to Wake Forest pitching lab, and other schools have similar pitching labs at the college level that are better than most minor league teams. I think have at their facilities. Between those things that all these big schools are investing in, obviously the NIL stuff where one college coach told us like this kid stayed in school because he wasn't going to be like a first round draft pick, but he could make more his senior year from NIL things than he would by being a 10th round pick or whatever it was. So it'll be interesting to me to see, is that going to change the balance a little bit. Are we going to have more Paul Skeens types who get drafted, not that level obviously, but guys who are just more ready to come to majors sooner?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. There's a lot of investment in some of these upper level college teams that have insane player development systems where
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot of professional baseball coaches and coordinators that come in as well, where they were previously a pitching coordinator for a team,
Right.
and now they're the main pitching coach for them. They're taking all of that stuff that they learned from their time in pro ball and implementing it into these college teams as well.
Yep.
Where at the minor league level, all of the tech you're bringing is from like the complexes. So what you're looking at is really whatever you can actually bring with you series to series, but then sometimes you're just limited as to, you know, the quality of the batting cages or the pitching tunnels or just the bullpens. And it's like, okay, setting up a TrackMan unit is going to be hard enough. I don't know if we're going to get like everything else that we need to really be able to set up the biomechanics kind of layout that we really would like to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing Lance mentioned, this is related to, you know, people trying to break in or advance in the field. It was about just creating something. I've probably talked about this on the pod. I know I've talked to, you know, students and others about it before. You know, if you're applying for a job in, we'll just say baseball, with a baseball team or something similar, obviously there's going to be high demand for it, and you just got to have something that you've done. You know, you can say I've had these skill sets in R and Python and whatever, but I should say, and really, teams often just want to see how you think. You know, how are you attacking this problem? How are you dealing with bad data? How are you doing these things? And that's as important as, you know, spitting out a clean model or whatever it is. I think is the process, and just having some work so someone can look at it and say, all right, well, he's thinking about this, or she's attacking this in a good way, or whatever it is. I think that's just an important thing, not just for baseball analytics, but just about anything. You know, if it's media, you obviously want to have like a tape. It's not tape anymore. I'll just tell you how old I am right there. But you know what I'm saying. You got to have, you know, a digital version of whatever it is now. And it's the same thing here. You just want to have something you've done, whether it's written on a blog, whether it's a project for school, whatever it is. It's super valuable to just show people what you can do and how you can do it.
I don't think there's a single person that I've met within the baseball industry that has ever disagreed with Lance's view on that, where it's, hey, we really would like to see some sort of portfolio. I've also talked to a lot of people who are directly involved in hiring, especially for some of the new hires within teams, you know, your lower level positions, the right out of college kind of deal. It's like what sets candidates aside. And it's not you giving your story about how you fell in love with the game. It's, here are the different projects I've done. Here are some writings I've done. Like for me, I always kind of struggled with like, how can I really display what I know to teams? And I remember I wrote a blog in college that I hadn't really thought about, you know, put out a few posts and everything. And then 3 years later during an interview, it's like, hey, we saw that blog article from 2018. I'm like, you did? Like, I didn't realize anyone was clicking on that, but okay, like, guess I'm ready to defend it. Like, I don't know if my viewpoints still align with, you know, sophomore year of college, but sure, we'll give it a go.
Yep. Yeah, super important. All right. Thank you, Brian. Thank you one last time to Lance Brozdowski for joining us on the show. Check our archives for a lot more shows with baseball people, including a couple Lance referenced. There's Mike Petriello, who is an analyst for MLB.com and ESPN StatCast broadcasts. Talked to him a couple years ago. And our own Tim Gibbons was on earlier this year. He was previously the Orioles AAA hitting coach. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show while you're there as well. We also appreciate any feedback on social or via email if you're so inclined. expectedvalue@truemedianetworks.com. On behalf of producer Brian Duffley and all of us here at True Media, I'm Paul Carr. Thank you for listening to Expected Value, the podcast that goes inside the sports analytics world.